morning. We're up here watching the sunrise at Vista Point on Highway 74. Steve Lech came by the Portola Community Center on March 23rd, 2018 and talked about the Pines to Palms Highway. If you like our lecture, please like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to join Historical Society of Palm Desert, please go to www.hspd.org and hit the join button. Thank you.
Memberships in 24 other local historical societies throughout Southern California, which is very cool. He's the past chairman of the Riverside County Historical Commission and the current chairman of the City of Riverside's Cultural Heritage Board. Are you sure you're retired? He has been a docent for the Mission Inn Foundation since 1988. And you know he's passionate about this. Steve has retired, so he can continue to research many aspects of Riverside County's varied history. We're very lucky he's taken the time to be with us tonight, so let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Christy. Was that up? Hello.
Oh, I turned it off. Go ahead, turn
She turned it off, okay.
Yeah, I thought you were doing a lapel, I'm sorry. There you go.
Is that better? Oh, there we go. Okay. Whoa, that's much better. Okay. Gosh, that intro was almost like I wrote it myself, isn't it? Okay, as she said, I've been doing local history now for a number of years, and I worked for Riverside County for almost 30 years. And as part of that, I would get around quite a bit, not so much out here in the desert because I was centered at the Riverside office, but I would get out and about, and I just became very, very interested in all things history related here in the county. And so as part of that, I've done research from Corona to Blythe and all points in between. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was the Pines to Palms Highway there. It is just such a unique, scenic route where you can go basically from the mountains to the desert in about 35 miles or so. And I had to start taking a look at it and why it, or how it came into play. And as it turns out, it was very much a community effort there. It's one of those things that we don't really see an awful lot of today. A community effort kind of comes from a grassroots. We petition whoever needs to be petitioned, and it gets done. And this was definitely one of them. You have to remember that during this time, and we're going to be talking about 19-teens, 20s, 30s, around that time, the tourism industry was very, very important throughout Riverside County. Obviously, it still is to a certain degree, but back then it was very, very important, and that's really what we're hitting up here with this highway. First of all, the name. I know on your things, on your website, etc., you all said it was the Palms to Pines Highway. Officially, it's the Pines to Palms Highway. And that came about by a board action, Board of Supervisors action, when they went to name it there. And it's probably due to the fact that it was built from the mountains to the desert, not the other way. So they started in the mountains and worked down to the desert. We're going to get into that here in a minute there. So, now I got to figure out how I can do 3 hands here, but okay. So what, come on, oh crap. Okay, so what is the highway that we're talking about today? It basically starts up here at the intersection of the Hermit Road with it, and then heads down through Garner Valley, Vandeventer Flats, and comes down Deep Canyon, and of course ends here in Palm Desert. That's what we're talking about, was the Pines to Palms Highway. You will see references early on to the entire thing, meaning from Hermit all the way up to the mountains and down here being the Pines to Palms Highway there. But that didn't last too long. It truly is from basically mountains, what we consider Mountain Center today, down here to Palm Desert, and that's what we're going to be talking about. It was not the first one to have that designation. The first one was the Jefferson Highway. Started in 1915 and went from Winnipeg to New Orleans. And it was said that if you took it from Winnipeg to New Orleans, it was the Pines to Palms Highway. And if you took it from New Orleans north, it was the Palms to Pines Highway there. That could be where we get the juxtaposition here. There. That ended with the numbering of the highways. Then most highways were named well before that. Then. Here is a very detailed topographic map drawn by Alex Fullmore, our county surveyor, showing the area. Lake Hermit, there would be the Mountain Center area, Garner Valley, down to Vandeventer Flats, here's Pinion Flats, and then out onto the desert here. This was done about 1927, so it was well before the highway came into play, well before Palm Desert, as you can see out there, etc. So this is basically what they were dealing with at this time. Now, we were looking for a way to get desert people up to the mountains with this. And this had been done for hundreds, if not thousands of years, on some of the old routes in and out of the region here. Here we are basically at Lake Hermit. This is going through Garner Valley. This is the road down into the Kaweah Valley, or Anza Valley as we know it today. We're in Vandeventer Flats here. And then this is the road that goes through Martinez Canyon. This one comes down Carrizo. And then this is the one that goes down Palm Canyon here. And these are all old roads that would have been used for the last thousands of years as some of the native peoples went between the desert and the mountains in search of food, in search of places to stay, dependent, of course, on the seasons there. So these were already done for, of course, thousands of years. But what they didn't include was a nice paved highway that you can take a car up on. And that's what we're going to be looking at now. Because some of our early attempts at a mountain desert highway started about 1919 or so, if you can imagine that. About 1919, we start to see petitions to take a road from here, the desert, up to the mountains. Before this, if you were living here somewhere in the desert, and back then we're really only talking about Palm Springs and Indio, you would have gotten on what counted as a highway, headed up to Banning, down to Hermit, and then taken the Hermit-Idlewild Road, the old one, the Crawford Toll Road, up. That is quite, I've seen parts of it, and they talk about wagons flipping over on their back. Yeah, because a couple of those parts were very steep. But Joe Crawford was not in it for the public's health. He was in it to get money, obviously. And so he made a couple of things that were probably better than a 45-degree angle getting up there. So it was a dangerous proposition, and needless to say. By the early 20s now, a number of people are saying we need to have highways up to the mountains. And a number of people, of course, petitioned the board, etc. But what they opted to do, first of all, was to build the Hermit-Idlewild Road. And that was, of course, going to be used much more. Why? Because a number of people are coming out from the more populated areas of LA, Orange County, Riverside, and the like to come into the mountains. Of course, the mountains were enjoying their summer vacation season then, so much more people are coming this way than coming from the desert up. So the board opts to go ahead and build a highway from Hermit to Idlewild. It redoes a lot of what the Crawford Toll Road was and earlier attempts at highways. And by about 1929 then, they had that highway in. The county used a very new system at the time. They used prison labor. There was the advent of road camps at this time, and Clem Sweeters, our sheriff, opted to start using that very early on. The very first one was out on what's now Gilman Springs Road, sort of towards San Jacinto then. That didn't last too long, but when it came to building the Hermit-Idlewild Road, then they put one up in the mountains here. This is a shot of it, about 1931 or so. Interestingly enough, that site is now McCall Park up in the mountains. So if you take the highway up and get to McCall Park, that's an equestrian camping site. That is the old road camp there. And what was the road camp? Well, it was basically a camp for men who were sentenced to whatever time frames to work in the roads. And the judge would send, I don't want to call them petty criminals, but they weren't your hardcore. They weren't murderers and arsonists and the like. These people could have been drunk drivers, they could have been petty thefts, wife beaters, any types of these types of people. Oftentimes, they would just be sentenced to work 6, 12, 24 months in the road camp. If Clem Sweeters needed more, maybe the judge would send a few more this way into his road camp there. So, of course, we're getting all kinds of different people in this, too. This is a shot of it today. The McCall Park, this would be looking, let me get my bearing straight, this would be looking south from the northern tip of it there, and where you see all the trees there, that's where all the camping is today. So in 1929 then, they finished the Hemet-Idlewild Road. And throughout this time, we've still got more people advocating for let's continue and let's keep, or let's make the desert route our next priority to bring at least a road out here to the desert. So now we have the beginnings of our attempts to make a mountain desert road then. Because as things finished, then we're ramping up, trying to get this going for a desert route. We already had the prison labor camp. So basically in 1929, they just went ahead, finished up that road, and then turned the guys heading east into, well, what's now Garner Valley. And this is the original configuration that was looked at starting all the way back in about 21 or so, when Alex Fullmore, the county surveyor, went out and did some original work on it. Basically, they were going to cut off from, that's the Hemet-Idlewild Road, there at Keene Camp, and then head down Garner Valley to Vandeventer Flats, and then turn north and go down Palm Canyon there. And that's the route that was being surveyed. The intersection was at Keene Camp here, and that was it's basically where Mountain Center is today. Mountain Center is a little bit to the north and west of it, but Keene Camp was a summer camp up in the mountains run by John and Mary Keene. They had the Fairview Hotel down in Florida, which of course became Val Vista later on. And it was a very popular place, and that became very much a place name in the mountains. So it would have broken off there, and then come down by Herky Creek Park. Herky Creek had actually started about 1926, so it's just a couple of years old at this point then. But there was a rudimentary road coming down from Keene Camp down into Garner Valley. It then would have was to pass Lake Hermit there, and at this time the Lake Hermit water folks were going to go ahead and open this up for sightseeing and recreation. Like before that, it was closed, completely closed, because this is the water system for the city of Hermit then. But at that point, they said, well, okay, we can open it up now that enough people come by. From there into Garner Valley, the Robert Garner family owned a lot of that, ran cattle. You still see that up there even today. We had a little trouble getting the right-of-way for them, but eventually that was done. And then continued on into the more southern portions until it was to get to Vandeventer Flats. Now, if you know Vandeventer Flats, that's the basically the Santa Rosa Indian Reservation today then. And that's where it was going to be the southernmost tip of it, and then head down into Palm Canyon. This is a shot of Palm Canyon, basically from about the present-day 74, looking north there. Palm Springs would be all of this down here then. So we're going to head down there and into Palm Canyon itself then, and then eventually it was going to end up at the Hermit's Bench. Now if you go to the Indian Canyons today, you drive through and you go up to the parking lot where the trading post is. That area where the parking lot is was the Hermit's Bench. And it was named that for this gentleman, Billy Pester. He was the hermit of Palm Springs. And and he lived in a little hut here up on the Hermit's bench, and he was called the original California hippie because he came out in 1906. He was a draft dodger. He lived off the land. Oftentimes he was nude. He just loved the desert. He ate all natural stuff. And like I said, he was considered to be the original California hippie. He was not dodging the draft here in America. He's German. So he was dodging the draft in Germany, trying to get out of that to come in. So anyway, that area is known as the Hermit's Bench. Now, Palm Springs already had a road that went from the village down to the Hermit's Bench, because there's a lot of people going to Palm Canyon to enjoy that. So the thought was that the highway would simply end there, continue on into Palm Springs there. And there's Palm Springs roughly at about this time too. Now Palm Springs here at this time was very much just the resort town. It was pretty much closed up in summer, with most of the people coming during the October to say April time frame here. Why I mention that is because things were about to change here. Because as we started to build the road and get really into it, there were two gentlemen here in the desert, specifically in Indio, who thought maybe we could do a better job bringing that road out here. And those two men were J. Wynne Wilson on the left, and then Wilson Howell on the right here. Now, J. Wynne Wilson, he is the editor of the Indio Date Palm newspaper. And so he's got his own, organ to get the word out then. And he's very vociferous about bringing the road closer to Indio. Wilson Howell, on the other hand, is a farmer in Indio, getting a little tired of the heat, looking to move up into the mountains there, but he is quite the trekker. He will go out and he surveys, and I don't mean engineering survey, I mean just line of sight, going out, surveying areas. He hikes up canyons, he goes up mountains, all that. He knows the lay of the land just absolutely within an inch there. And so he's already kind of laid out a great road that would take people from the mountains to the desert. An interesting story about him is that he had, before there was a road, he had a place up here, basically at the base of Santa Rosa Mountains. He eventually bought 3 sections of land up there, including Santa Rosa Peak, etc., etc. And he would go up there and, of course, be down here in the desert, and he would drive in both of those ways. People thought he had a road. He had discovered a road that could be run by a car. Turns out he had 2 black Model Ts. And he drove one from Indio to basically the base of the mountain, got out, walked about 4 miles up, and then got in his other one and took that to his other place up in the mountains, and then vice versa. So he had the identical cars. People thought he already had one, but no, he hadn't. But he had scouted out a great route there. J. Wynne Wilson, he's your consummate booster in Indio. Every town had a booster back then. The person who was just gung-ho, trying to get more people out here, trying to get more investment here. Because at this time, of course, investments are local. Okay? Whenever you came out and you invested in a town, the way you made your investment grow was to get more people to do the same. If that didn't happen, the town went bust, you lost. Yeah. So we think of people like J. Wynne Wilson in Indio, the McCallums in Palm Springs, Frank Miller in Riverside, the owner of the Mission Inn, and the like. J. Wynne Wilson was the guy out here, and of course he had the Date Palm newspaper there, so he could get to everybody real quick. Well, they contended that a better route would be to take the road, continue it east from Vandeventer Flats, then go around Pinyon Flats, as you see here, with Mount San Jacinto on the left and then Asbestos Mountain here on the right, and then basically go along Deep Canyon here, and then come down to the desert at a point, generally speaking, either in Carrizo Canyon or Dead Indian Canyon there. That would bring it a little closer to Indio. Why? Well, why was that important? Well, because Indio was a year-round town. Most people who lived there were either farming, so they were there year-round, or they worked for the railroad, and of course they were there year-round too. It was not the resort town that Palm Springs was then. So, of course, it would go out into the valley from there. This is from Vista Point, of course, but it would head down into this area and be a lot closer there to Indio, that is. So when construction starts now in about mid-1929, we've got a number of factions going on here, but they go ahead and start in on construction. This apparently was pretty typical at this time. Nowadays, of course, we would figure out the right-of-way, we would get the right-of-way, we would do all this. Then we start constructing. They just started. And we'll work it out as we go then. And that's going to be very problematic then, as we'll see here. So construction begins then when Al Fullmore turns his crews east from the road camp there and starts on down towards the desert. This is a shot of Alex Fullmore. He did more to set up a lot of our early highways and the roads that we know very well today than pretty much anybody else. He was he worked in the survey department starting about 1905. He was the county surveyor starting in 1916, and he retired about 1946 then. And so he was quite the mover and shaker. You see his name on all of these things. The Ortega Highway, the Hermit Idlewild Road, the Banning Idlewild Road, all these things are done by Alex Fullmore. And then that's a shot of his crew there. That's him early on. And that's J.F. Davidson, if you remember that name in surveying and engineering. They had a huge outfit in Riverside for many years. And so that's J.F. Davidson right there. I don't know who the others are, but that's the crew, and they were out doing their stuff. So of course they've got the prison road crews out doing the building. This is what it would have looked like. This is not that. This, in all likelihood, is the road from Keene Camp up to Idlewild being built. So I mean, it would be very close. But you've got a lot of horsepower, wagons, you've got a little bit of steam power, and then a lot of guys with shovels and picks and stuff like that. This is not something that we've got a lot of heavy equipment on because you're using prison labor then. So anyways, so we start building almost immediately, and almost immediately there's a controversy about the route there. Come on. There we go. The portion in red was going to be done no matter what. That's from Keene Camp down to Herky Creek. Okay? So they're starting on that, and there are now a number of people going to the Board of Supervisors. I should have prefaced this by saying the Board of Supervisors was the ones who authorized the building of it. This was built by the county. And so anything that was done had to go through the Board of Supervisors for approval. All the surveys, the monies, the appropriations, what Clem Sweeters was doing with the road camp, etc. That all went through them. So when construction starts, we see a whole bunch of people going up to the board, starting to advocate for these different routes. The folks in Palm Springs, in Banning, and Riverside, they're advocating for the route to go down Palm Canyon. Why? Because it would be closer. If we're going to make this for tourists, the thought was make it closer for tourists who are going to go back home to Riverside, LA, and the like. There's another faction that wants to take a much more direct route called the West Fork of Palm Canyon route. And this would have been, well, quite a route. There's a number of people who have or are working on making Mount San Jacinto a state park and a recreation area, and they want people to get up there quickly. And so we start to advocate for this route here. And then, of course, there's J. Wynn Wilson and Wilson Howell, who are advocating with other folks from Indio to come down what was becoming known as the Dead Indian Canyon route here, because that's the canyon that would have come down there. So these are the routes that we're starting to argue about. That West Fork route, if you imagine, do we all know where Herky Creek is? that Apple Canyon Road that goes right by it, that would have been part of it. It would have come up and gone through or between Apache and Spittler Peaks here. That's at the far end of Apple Canyon Road. And then down the west fork of Palm Canyon. When Fullmore and his gang were over there surveying, because the board charged them with going and looking at all these routes and reporting back. Apparently they came out of this area with their clothes torn, they were almost naked, their feet are bleeding, and they say no, this way. And you can look at it, I mean, try and get a road through that. Even today, it looks like that. This is about 1927, I believe it is, there, and then there's this one here, looking roughly at the same site. It was estimated that it would probably cost 15 to 20 times what the other two routes would cost to do this one here. Yeah, it'd be a lot quicker, but they said there's just no way we can do that. So that one was tabled very, very quickly here. So then, of course, we start in, we've nixed the yellow route, so they can keep going down here, because no matter what route is, the road down to Vandeventer Flats is going to be the same, no matter what. So the construction crews keep going. They keep going through the Herky Creek area, Lake Hermit. They cross a couple of creeks like Herky Creek, through Garner Valley, etc. And they start edging towards Vandeventer Flats, when it suddenly dawned on people they hadn't talked to the Santa Rosa Indians about getting the right-of-way. And the Santa Rosa Indians were none too happy about this. They weren't too thrilled about having a main highway go through their reservation. That said, they were in need of money. About 2 or 3 years beforehand, a large storm had come through their property, their reservation, and wiped out a lot of their crops and especially their irrigation system that they'd spent quite a bit of money and time and effort getting to, setting up and getting to work. So the Santa Rosa Indians decided maybe what they ought to do is see if they could get the money for that out of this right-of-way. So when it came time to talking to the Santa Rosas, the County Board of Supervisors came to them and offered them $1,000 for the right-of-way. And at this time, the right-of-way was going to take in about 2 to 2.5 miles along the reservation there. And the Indians scoffed at that. They came back and said, well, they need about $8,000. And the board flipped their lid. There's a quote in there that said, there's absolutely no way we're paying anybody that kind of money, let alone the Indians, $8,000 for this. And the crews would keep building. So Sweeters and his gang, under the leadership of Jim Wickard, who's heading up the gang, he keeps working, and they're getting closer and they're getting closer to the reservation line. They literally get within about a couple hundred feet of having to just stop when a compromise is brought about by J. Wynn Wilson, who opts to give them $4,000 for it and move the right-of-way so that it only takes in about a mile of the reservation. And so when you go on the highway today, you go through a large oak grove like here. That's pretty much the area that's now through the Santa Rosa Reservation there. J. Wynn Wilson was also hoping to preserve that as much as possible, and they did too. But anyways, for about a mile, maybe a tad bit more, they have the road through the Santa Rosa Reservation then. So they get it out of there. Construction continues through the reservation, but now it's getting down to crunch time because the crews are really working, but they're at Vandeventer Flats, and it's really getting time to choose now. What do we do? Do we head north and go through Palm Canyon, or do we head east and go the Pinyon Flats route that's being advocated by Wilson and Wilson Howell? So there's a big hearing at the Board of Supervisors, people coming up with petitions, huge groups from chambers of commerce are going to the board, petitioning them from all over. It's not just here. People from Temecula and Idlewild and Banning and Paris and Riverside and all that bit, along with the folks here in Indio and Palm Springs are coming out and saying, you know, we want Route A and we want Route B, la da 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 da. Well, what it came down to was, yeah, they had done the survey through Palm Canyon initially. The problem is, like when they were building the road, nobody thought to talk to the Agua Calientes. And who owns the mouth of Palm Canyon? The Agua Calientes. And they were absolutely adamant that they were not going to sell and not going to have the road go through their place. They were pretty mad at the non-Indians. If you remember, of course, Palm Springs is on a checkerboard pattern with the reservation having odd-numbered lots, or the different lots. Anyway, they were having lots of problems with some of the residents of Palm Springs because their cattle would, of course, go hither and yon. If people caught the Indians' cattle on their land, they'd hold basically the cattle for hostage until the Indians paid them then. At the same time, Palm Canyon, starting in, well, really about 1910 or so, is becoming a very tremendous tourist destination. And there's a quote in the books, I can't remember how many thousands, but the CHP officer in Banning one time counted about 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles going through Banning one weekend to get to Palm Canyon. And that's in 1927 or 1928. That's not now, that's 90 years ago. They're leaving behind all kinds of trash. Palm Canyon is becoming thrashed. They say that the piles of picnic baskets, broken plates, beer bottles, wax paper, etc. is just getting to be tremendous. So what do the Indians do? They set up a fence and the toll booth that you see today. Not that one, but they fence their land across Palm Canyon to keep their cattle in, and they also set up a toll booth. So anybody wanting to go to the Palm Canyons now needs to pay a toll. I think it was about $0.25 or something like that at the time. I don't know that that discouraged too many people, but it raised money for them. So needless to say, the decision was sort of made for the Board of Supervisors. It wasn't going to go down Palm Canyon because they couldn't get the right-of-way at all. And so they told the folks, oh, and also when the survey came in, it was actually going to be cheaper to do the Dead Indian Canyon route as opposed to the Palm Canyon route. Not by a lot, but it was going to be cheaper. So James Wickard and the gang kept going through, or I should say maybe around Palm Pinion Flats there. And at this point then, the Board of Supervisors, who's running out of money, decides maybe what we ought to do is get the federal government involved in this. They got the federal government involved in the road building with the Hemet-Idlewild Road to build a certain segment of it, partly because with all the goings on with making Mount San Jacinto, you name it, a state park, national monument, and all the things that was going on, the federal government was looking to bring people up too. And so the thought was, why don't you guys pay for part of the road? So that's exactly what they did here. They went to the federal government through the National Forest Service to build a portion of the road. Now there was also another reason for it too. Here we are, this is Sugarloaf Mountain here. Potential endpoints were going to be either mile 22 or mile 23 here. This is the Sugarloaf Cafe right here. Give you an idea of where we are then. The road crews had built up to that point there, but now it was going to get serious. Of course, on a road crew, you get all kinds of people, mostly who don't know the first thing about building a road, which is unfortunate. That's fine because most of what they've been through was fairly flat. Garner Valley, Pinion Flats, Vandeventer Flats, that's all pretty flat. We're not going up and down huge slopes. That's going to change big time when we start getting into the desert, and you're dealing with vastly different soil too. So they decided, well, we need somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. Plus, we'd like the federal government to foot the bill. So they opted to to end the county construction here at mile 23. And guess what's mile 23 point? That's the Coeatelinit overlook. I think that may have been just sort of a staging area for the crews starting either ending the county portion or starting the federal government portion there, which is probably why we have that then. So the federal government put out a bid to do the highway. I don't know, has anybody here done public sector bidding? I used to do it for the County Parks District. When we'd go, oh heck, all we want to do is put in a playground or something like that. My RFP is about that thick. I would kill a whole forest full of trees for the request for proposals. In the National Archives, I found the RFP for a 10-mile segment of this highway. It's one 8.5 by 14 sheet, typewritten. That's it, one side. One side typewritten. Basically it says, we're the Riverside County government, you're the federal government, we want you to build the highway according to the state specs, we'll pay you this much, sign here. It was absolutely hilarious. I had to copy that and send it to my boss. Because like I said, we don't do a table of contents in one page, let alone the entire RFP for it. So anyway, they go out to bid for a real contractor, and they come up with Frank Cuff. Frank Cuff is a road contractor out of Los Angeles, there, and he comes out and takes over there basically at that mile 23. Notice he's got real equipment here. He's got a steam shovel, he's got dump trucks, he's got all kinds of stuff there. And he is working from that point on down there. I spoke to his son a few years back, and he said Dad basically lost his shirt on this contract because he wasn't planning on the looseness of the soil on that mountainside. He said he would make a cut in there and get it all nice and ready, and the next day the thing had fallen in. And his son Marshall figured some of them he'd probably done 4 and 5 times before it actually got to a point where it would stand up by itself. Ben, this is his operation too. See a lot of his grading equipment in here. And then, well, in order to save time and also probably save his contract, Frank Cuff subcontracted with another contractor named Leo Honig. And he had Leo Honig start at the base, which is pretty much about where the visitor center is, and start working up. The road had already been surveyed, so they knew where it was going to go. Leo Honig started at the base and started working up, and then they were going to meet, and they ended up meeting at a place called Deep Cut. I bet you can't figure out where that is. It's where the Deep Cut is. They didn't go out on a limb to name these places. But the deepest cut, I don't want to say it's halfway up, but it's close to halfway up, is where they met then. And the road had been surveyed by and designed by Fullmore to do. This is a shot of the two contractors within eyesight of each other. They spent about a good month. They could walk up and meet each other and see each other's work, but it was about a month away from getting the actual road. This would have been Leo Honig's position, and that would have been Frank Cuff's position there. So they're working and they're putting together that, and so now we decide we're going to start opening the road. And true to form, of course, our enthusiastic editor of the Date Palm, Mr. Wilson, was so enthusiastic about getting this thing open, he opted to go ahead and have a celebration for it on June 18th. Going to open the road, going to have a big to-do about it, and guess what? The road wasn't open. It was passable, but it wasn't anywhere near being open. But they had to have it anyway because they'd advertised it. They'd invited newspaper men from all, and I mean all over, Northern California, Oregon, Southern California, of course, everywhere. This is at Deep Cut where they met. Here is, of course, J. Wynn Wilson, his wife Josephine. That would be Frank Cuff and Leo Honig, and then members of their crews. Obviously not the Boy Scout. The Boy Scout was there to help cut the ribbon then. But you can see what shape the road was in. They were able to get through, and they went on up from here. They went on up to, They went on up to the Tockwitz Lodge there, and had a huge shindig. They had a big barbecue, big party, overnight party. They had all kinds of talks. They had dignitaries. This is just going to be the greatest thing to hit our county for quite some time here. Unfortunately, after all the hoopla, the contractors closed the road because so many people started coming up to see it that they were blocking the work being done, and if the sides are falling, you don't want people hanging around there anyway. So June 18th we had the grand opening, but it didn't actually open until about the end of July then, and then they had another big announcement and people started in on it. When it was first built, notice this shot here, when it was first built it was simply a gravel road, and that's how you made highways back then. It was simply a gravel road. A little while later, it became, well, actually it became very popular almost immediately, so popular that it was wearing away. So then they came up and oiled it. You see the road base here? That's an oiled road. So we're probably talking about maybe, I don't know, 1935 or so in this shot then. And then in 1937, they actually paved it. Again, because it was being so used that it was wearing away then. And so they went ahead and paved it at this point. But from here you can see what's known as the 7-level hill. And that is how Alex Fullmore got the road down from the side of Deep Canyon onto the desert floor there. And it was known as an engineering marvel at that time with all the switchbacks then. But that was basically how he could do it. And that was kind of the big problem that Frank Cuff had, was making all those cuts and fills in soil that really can't handle it all that well then. So anyway, it opened in officially about into July 1932 then. Let's take a look at a couple of places that came alongside or along the road as it went on. I talked about, of course, Wilson Howell, who had done a lot of the surveying. He actually helped the surveyors do their surveying then. He had already bought the 3 sections of land at the top of Santa Rosa Mountain and heading north into Palm Canyon. So the road went right through his place, and he developed a little roadside location called Ribbonwood here. Ribbonwood was named for the ribbonwood that was there. It's also called Red Shanks sometimes there. You barely, but you can see there's like a little brush hut here. He had like a little store. He would sell drinks and little knickknacks and things like that. Eventually he had some cabins up in here where you could rent and spend the night, etc. It was kind of like an overnight place then. If you know the abandoned gas station there at Springbrook, that's basically that area right there. Because Wilson Howell much later on sold to the developers of Springbrook, and they developed a good chunk of what had been Wilson Howell's property there. That gas station would be probably right about here, right now. Yeah. If we take that picture. Yeah. Another shot of Ribbonwood. This is the little brush hut that he had there. Oftentimes he'd be out and about doing all kinds of things because he was managing his own agricultural operation, etc. So most of the stuff in there for sale was just on the honor system. You know, take a Coke, leave your nickel, and you're off. So also with him, just a little ways down, was Art Nightingale at the Nightingale store. This is what became the Sugarloaf Cafe in later years. Art Nightingale actually came up to the area and started a concession, for lack of a better term, to feed the work crews. And so he stayed there, and then he did a lot of the subdividing of the Pinyon Flats area. Why? Well, because the whole point of, one of the whole points of this road was so that people out here in Indio who were staying here, you know, year-round, could go up and have a good night's sleep up in the cooler climes then. So by going up to Pinyon Flats, you could start a little cabin or something like that there. If you were working here in Indio, as night fell, or maybe the weekend or what have you, you could go up there and it'd be cooler in the days before air conditioning. So that was Art Nightingale. And then of course, when we tied this into Highway 111 there, we had a major intersection of, well, it wasn't Highway 111 at the time, it was the Palm Springs Indio Highway. But then we had a major intersection, and of course what came there was Palm Desert, and about 15 years later or so, with the advent of Desert Magazine building, etc., etc. So, anyways, I think that's about what yeah, that's it. That's the end. So, does anybody have any questions? Yeah. I do have the books, if you'd like to know more about it. They're in the back there for sale, too. But does anybody have any questions? Well, yeah.
Scenic highways, how do they, and when was it set up as a quote scenic highway?
That's done by the state. And I believe those were done in the 60s, or starting in the 60s and 70s. But that's because it's a state highway there. The state actually took it over about 1937. The county built it, but because it was so popular, the maintenance on it was a nightmare. And so the county got the state to take it over then. And so they took over all of the Pines to Palms Highway, the Hermit Idlewild Road, etc., and did that because they're in much better shape to maintain a highway than Riverside County was.
How much of that is owned by the federal government now?
Oh, none of it's owned by the federal government.
Isn't it part of a national park or something?
Well, what? You talking about the road itself?
No, parts of the area up there.
Oh, I haven't the foggiest idea.
Okay.
Yeah, federal land, state land, it's all interspersed. I wouldn't have any idea.
And how about when did they build the road to Vandy?
Well, that's in stages too. There were early ones. There was one about 1910 or so, but the one we know of was about 1950, 51 or so. That was a little bit later. Yeah.
When the road first opened, how long would it typically take to get from Palm Desert to Idlewild?
I don't know that I've ever seen anything about that.
I mean, it was a rough road.
It was a rough road, about 35 miles. I would think you're probably looking at a good couple hours, hour and a half to 2 hours maybe. Because like you said, it's a rough road. The cars couldn't go that fast at the time. I bet it would take you an hour and a half or so. Not nearly as long as driving all the way around to Hermit and up. That's for sure. So,
Just wondering, what's the elevation change between the top and the bottom?
Santa Rosa Summit, 4979.
Yeah, top of Santa Rosa's right about 5. So take off a little.
4979.
Yeah, so you're about maybe 4,000 at Ribbonwood, and down here you're at I don't know, several hundred or so. It's quite an elevation change. I don't know the numbers. Paul?
The concrete or the curb and gutter, especially in the lower desert section, is unique. It's not concrete, the standard type. Do you know anything about how that was designed and when that was put in?
No, I haven't seen anything about it. There's speculation it was WPA. The road itself was not, and I've heard that rumor, that the road was done by the WPA. It was done well before the WPA. That said, the concrete work probably could have been, or at least the CCC. And because the CC camps were throughout here. Harry?
The rock work at the bottom was done by 2 guys from Anza.
Where at the bottom?
The lower curbing along there, that rock area,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
that was done by 2 guys from Anza.
Yeah.
Because I had the privilege of working with Wilson Howell, and he and I laid out most of the original roads in Pinyon Crest.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Get up there, Harry.
Okay, yes?
You spoke of a camp early on. No, before
The
camp.
Prison Road Camp?
Yes.
Yeah,
Where is that?
that's McCall Park.
Where is that? Because
If you were to take the highway up
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and then continue like you're going to Hermit, about, I don't know, maybe half mile or so beyond the intersection, you'll see a cutoff for McCall Park.
No, going to Anza or going to Idlewild?
Going to Hermit. Yeah.
So
You're on the 74, you go past that interchange to go up to Idlewild, you keep going to Hermit, and it's about a mile or half mile or so up there. You'll see it. You can drive around in there, you just can't use it, because like I said, it's an equestrian camping and staging area for lots of the trails that go through there. So,
I have maybe a stupid question, I don't know, but is it easier, in my mind, I'm thinking, is it easier to build a road going down or going up that distance, I mean, I'm thinking of all of the big equipment and the stuff you have to have.
Well, remember, most of it was not built with big equipment.
Right.
It was built by the prison labor.
Right.
I think they had 2 steam shovels, and that was the extent of their equipment that the county had. I'm not sure that it really matters, to be honest with you. They simply built it that way because they had that starting point up there at what's now McCall Park and went down. Yeah. One of these lectures, the gentleman took me to task because no, they built it up. Well, that's because of Mr. Honig, but the overall building of it was from mountains to the desert there. No, I think for the most part, they had a very easy time doing it. There's really no mention in the paper that they're really having a very difficult time of it. There's a few times where they're trying to cross rivers and building small bridges, like Herky Creek, etc., where they got kind of hung up. But you can send your crews across and keep going while you're building a little bridge. I don't remember any really kind of big hang-ups. It's just they were thinking, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the right equipment to do it down here in the desert. And as it turned out, they were quite right. And they could have lost people probably in some of those landslides if they were using prison labor out here. So,
I saw a pretty substantial river in that, one of those early shots of that upper camp up in the mountains. Was that Herky Creek area? Or, I mean, finally, there was a lot of, I mean, it was a pretty sizable river.
Hermit Lake?
Not Hermit Lake.
you mean like maybe here? Come on, wake up.
It was a picture of the camp.
Oh, the picture of the camp?
Yeah.
That one?
No, it's not street. Not showing.
Seven Street.
Yeah. Not that one.
Steve, it's on.
Oh.
That doesn't look like a river.
No.
Oh, you know what this, okay, wait a minute. I have to do this. Boop. There we go. Come on. You know about that?
There, right there. What is that?
That's a road.
Yeah, that's a road.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not a river.
That's the worst camp.
That's a road.
Is there a certain amount of dynamite used for those cuts going through it?
Oh, sure.
And don't they use, looking for the drill holes, I didn't really see any on our trips up and down, but.
Probably because the places where the drill holes were caved in there. But yeah, they would have blasted, they would have had to back then. Yeah.
Were people killing themselves on this road, kind of like we hear about today?
Oh, yeah.
Because of going off the edge and stuff?
I don't know about going off the edge, but yeah, you'd always have your speeders, and especially coming down too. But there were wrecks. There were wrecks, very much so, yeah.
Now, you used to be able to pass on the highway, and now you can't. You're not supposed to.
Yeah, you're not supposed to, yeah, people still do. So, absolutely.
What's WPA stand for?
Works Progress Administration.
Thank you.
You know, Franklin Roosevelt had all these 3-letter things for the Depression. Yeah, CCC was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Yeah.
During construction in the flat areas, how far could they go in a day?
Oh, they do maybe upwards of a half mile to a mile or so in a day. And that included, grading it out, rocking it, compacting it, etc. Yeah, it took them a number of months to do it, but it wasn't, they weren't on it for 30 and 40 years. You figure it started, what I say, maybe mid to late 29, and then it ended in June of 32. So it took, about 3 years or so? Yeah. They go half mile or so maybe. But remember, the farther out you get, the more time you got to go back and forth till you camp. So that, of course, later on there'd be camps along the way, but you'd have to transport your crew. So,
So in many of the pictures, I noticed that it did say palms to pines.
right.
So when,
It changed?
No, nobody changed it. It's just when you've got two terms like that, they always get interchanged.
okay.
Yeah. It starts from day one. Most of the early maps will show it as Pines to Palms Highway, but what you were probably looking at were the Burton Fraser photographs. And he was fairly notorious for mixing things up and the like. But, oh yeah, from day one it was called either or. But the official name that the board adopted was the Pines to Palms Highway. And that's what I used throughout the book and the lecture. So, okay, Harry?
Yeah, there was already a road through Vandeventer Flat to the old village site on the backside of Santa Rosa Village. And there was also a road from there to Pinion for the old asbestos mines. Long before any of this other was done, those roads were already in existence.
Yeah, a lot of times we just kind of went over existing stuff, too. Why reinvent the wheel, for that matter, so.
Somebody told me a story, I wonder if it was true. That's a pretty good slant from Bigmore and all the way down to, Highway 111. It's a pretty good slope. They said there wasn't any stoplight or stop line at the end of Highway 111. Is that true? For a time there? You know?
The only picture I've seen of it is before the highway came through. So no, there was no stop sign or stop light there.
Wow.
Well,
So
it was an old Y where it came into 111.
Oh, was it?
And it had boulevard stops at each of the Ys, because my grandfather, we were headed for Indio one day and he took the wrong Y and we headed toward Palm Springs, so we had to go down there and turn around so we could go back to Indio. Because we couldn't make a turn the other way on it.
That's a pretty good slope.
Right, the only shot I've seen of it is before the highway was built. There are some pictures in the National Archives of what portions of this lower part look like, because of course, when the federal government got involved, all those archives are there. They don't have the stuff up in the mountains, for instance, but they've got the stuff down here in the desert. So, yeah, Paul?
Archives in Washington or archives
in Paris?
Paris.
Yeah, the Riverside Archives in Paris. You got to remember that one. So, the ones that all the folks from LA and Orange County got really mad about when they moved them from Laguna Niguel to here. So, I have no sympathy.
If you look at the 1945 photo at our museum, you'll see the Y at the intersection.
Okay. Okay, yes?
Besides the movie It's a Mad, Mad World, have there been other movies filmed on the highway?
I believe so, but I couldn't quote any to you.
One was the, we saw this in the Palm Springs Museum, the Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, the Long Trail.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I need to see that film again.
Yes.
And find out where on the highway.
Yeah, okay.
When the Elvis Presley film, King Creole, Kid Galahad went through Garner Valley.
Okay.
Well, Tom Mix was filmed over at the valley there by Hermit Lake. We used to stop and watch him film it.
Yeah, there have been well, that's a whole other thing. I've got a whole lecture on the movies made at the Mission Inn. You don't want to see those. But there are several around this area, so, yeah.
They were there this morning filming commercials on Highway 74. Because when I came down to the museum this morning, I got through just ahead of them.
Oh, really?
CHP was getting ready to shut 74 down so they could film commercials.
Okay.
It happens every day.
That's right.
We're building an industry here.
Okay, well, if nothing else, I'll be around here if you have any other questions. So, thank you all for coming out.
I want to remind you, we have some of his books here if you're interested in going. And thank you for coming, and please come to the next one. It'll be our last one for the season. And thank you for coming, everybody.
Hit the right button.